afternoon, and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name's Emily Blay. I'm the Client Services Manager here at MTech, and I'll be moderating our session today. I'm joined by my colleagues Iain Shield and David Thorne, who together will be presenting a demo of and discussing our popular Connected Insights platform. Just a couple of notes on housekeeping before we begin. All attendees are on mute during this webinar, and following the presentation, I will moderate a short Q&A where I'll put any submitted questions to Iain and David anonymously on your behalf. If you'd like to submit a question, please type your note into the questions pane at any time during the webinar. We're hoping to leave time to address all the questions, but if we fall short, we'll respond directly to you after the webinar. So I think that's it from me. So without further ado, I'll let the team introduce themselves and we'll get started. So David, would you like to kick us off today?
Hi, yeah, I'm David Thorne. I'm Director of NHS Insights Interaction at MTech Access. I'll be joining in a little bit today from two perspectives. One is, as some of you will know, I was formerly involved in senior roles in the NHS, particularly around information. I was a Director of Information in a big PCT, for example. And then the other aspect, which I'm always curious when I look at these systems and the discussion we'll have, is I've used systems like this out in the field. I've worked in market access for big pharma companies and also managed teams. So I'm interested from both those perspectives. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, David. That's great. Hi, everybody. My name's Iain Shield. I'm a consultant in our digital team, and I've been involved over many years in putting together digital tools for field teams, and I'm leading on our Connected Insights platform, which we're going to go through today. So without further ado, I'll just move off this holding slide and just talk you through our agenda for today. So we're going to talk about this product that we have called Connected Insights. We're going to look at what the NHS values from data insights. We'll have a look at the advantages of these types of insights dashboards. We have a video demo today to show one of these dashboards being built. We'll have a look in depth at a few more features and feedback we've had from the field of these tools in use, and then we'll open it up for questions. So to start off with then, what is Connected Insights? Well, it's a platform that we have to build presentation aids, which are used by field teams to discuss real-world data with customers. So what is it used for then? It has many use cases, although we find it's mainly used for illustrating unmet need and ultimately building a case for change to drive market access. So you can see this little flow underneath here. We have a web-based dashboard editor. We'll have a look at that later on. We can build, or you can, and the output is either iPad or web or CLM Viva presentations, and these dashboards are then shared in the field and used to discuss those insights and the data available. So just to reinforce this, if budget impact models illustrate the effect of a change, Connected Insights dashboards communicate the need for change. But I wanted to pause around this communicate the need for change, because is it a communication? It's an investigation together, or it could be, to explore, to discuss, perhaps even demonstrate the need for change. It enables you to build a relationship with folk in the field. It helps prepare for change. It positions folk as partners in tackling problems, sharing those problems, and it enables folk to spot opportunities for improvements. So what does the NHS value from data insights? So folk want to see things that are relevant to their area of interest, data that is useful in their service development, data that is meaningful in their populations, in their local populations, and that could be adapted to answer their specific questions, and of course coming from trusted data sources with clear messages and clear presentation. And just to bring, if you like, Connected Insights into this slide, the orange, if you like, are the answers. So it can be relevant, it can be specific to their therapy, to your therapy area. It can be population specific. trends could be analysed. Would that be helpful in service development? You can pick an area, you can drill down deeper into the data. It can be meaningful for those local populations. Where are the outliers? It can be comprehensive, very comprehensive and dynamic. So it could, you could jump around and find the answers to particular questions. Of course, the data imported into this platform comes from sources that you're probably already familiar with, many public data sources. And across the product, there is a focus on simplicity. But I wanted to pause there because this slide was supplied by colleagues, and I wanted to just explain, or rather invite David to explain, why we know these things. How do we work inside that NHS environment? So David, hopefully you've been brought into the call, and I just wanted to pass over to you for a moment or so just to explain why we know what we know about the NHS and their requirements around data insights.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks. I'll be brief, guys, because I'm really eager for Ian to continue and then for us to have a discussion. I mentioned before when I introduced myself that I was a Director of Information in the NHS, and I regularly used to ask key account managers to come in with various tools. One of the things that perhaps outside the NHS isn't appreciated, I covered an area of 800,000 people, had access to all kinds of data around those patients. But what I didn't have was wider data, and I really enjoyed Ian's emphasis of the population aspect, because we couldn't create peer groups, we couldn't look at similar places around the country and compare ourselves. And the systems that the pharma and medtech account managers had were actually superior to ours inside the NHS. Again, as many people know, I'm a non-exec director of a primary care network, a PCN. The PCNs are really being pushed to develop their population-based health analysis. And again, they face similar problems. We've got really rich data sets in primary care and PCNs, CCGs and others are supplying us with information. But in my example, I work in a PCN, which is classic kind of sheep farming, rural area, that kind of area. We don't have data to compare ourselves with similar areas. Our nearest peers are places like Newcastle and Sunderland that have got completely different populations. So going back to Ian's issue, within MTech Access, there's people like me, my colleague Tom Clark, who many people know, who also works with the PCN, but we have a faculty and associates. We have a small team and we work through expert NHS advisors. So we get rich, contemporary, straight off the bat opinions from them, which we use, well, Ian uses to design the system. And Ian's going to take you through now one example of the feedback we get from something like 70 contracted friends of MTech Access, if you like, who are out there in key roles, whose opinions really help us to customize these services and make them cute. Ian, back to you.
Thank you, David. That's really helpful. And it segues nicely to this slide with regards to Hilary, who is the management lead for West Northumberland PCN. So we asked Hilary, what, in your opinion, what do primary care PCNs need to know about diabetes data? And you can see her response on the screen here. I'm not going to read it all out, don't worry, I shall spare you that. I've just highlighted some things in orange that I just want to draw your attention to. So things like, where are the gaps? What's the prevalence? What's the expenditure? Is the variation? How do practicing PCNs do in relation to something else? How well are patients managing their diabetes, and how can this be improved? So these are the sorts of things, you know, almost off the cuff, that she's trying to deal with day to day. And there may be sources of data that can answer these. There aren't necessarily, there's no necessarily a panacea, one size fits all. You know, you might be able to find data that helps with some of these, but that's a start, and a great start, and something that I know Hilary and others like her would be interested in. So I guess that poses the question, are PCNs part of your market access strategy? So bring it back to Connected Insights. What is this all about, and who uses it, and how, and what do they do with it? So it's typically used by RAM, CAM, hopefully you know those abbreviations, regional account manager and key account manager, specialist or specialist teams, to identify and discuss opportunities, ultimately to improve patient care, to discuss and share data on their local health economy, things like trends. We've already mentioned peers a couple of times, and against national targets and other targets. How are folk doing? It's a great opportunity to develop partnerships with customers by sharing those types of insights. But you'll also find, or we're finding, that the dashboards follow, your product story. So it won't necessarily have claims throughout it or value messages, but it will follow, well, it follows the data, but of course to your story. So for instance, is prescribing following national guidance? Where are the outliers? It helps with identifying trends and driving awareness. It could help, for instance, another example use case, higher prevalence of chronic disease is likely to present more patients with condition X. Perhaps that's a condition that you have a product in. It drives awareness, and benchmarking can really help with that. Is the variation and inequality in provision of care? Where can we save? How can we assist with aligning with national strategies? And of course, through these dashboards, there are methods of linking in other materials. We can link through to related materials, perhaps a budget impact model or other support pieces, detail aids and so on. We have the option of including summary reports, which can act as leave pieces. That's a great way to enable sharing after a call. And of course, it can also be used. And we have quite a few cases where folk are using these types of dashboards for pre-call planning. So what is the end output? We've talked about it a lot so far. What does it actually look like? Well, you can see a few examples here of demo style dashboards. So on the top left there, we are looking at some QOF indicators. It's a diabetes-based tool. The question could be, how are we doing versus targets? So you could pick an area. In this case, it's a CCG in England, and you can see the data on that. And I think the chart below shows that with its in a similar CCG comparison group. Benchmarking, the middle one here, we're looking at how am I doing versus my peers, and we're actually displaying several groupings here. National at the bottom, STP top left, and most similar CCGs top right. And the screen on the right here, state of the nation style infographic. So we can hook data points up to individual areas. So you could pick an area and the data on screen can change. It's a nice visual, engaging way to have a dialogue and make it relevant to a stakeholder. So numerous features such as maps. We don't actually show a map here. We have numerous health boundary maps, loads of different chart types, special charts, text, tables, references, and so on. Enable flexibility to create useful and engaging dashboards. And the output, as we've mentioned already, is iPad, for instance, using Viva, or standalone iPad or web. So we have a great level of support for the end dashboards that we create. So what are the advantages of these sorts of dashboards? Well, I think number one I put on here, they do enable us to pull together disparate data sources. I think many people will probably be aware of the types of data, HES, prescribing, and QOF, and so on and so forth. And people may already have that on a server somewhere, and it's typically buried. And you might have a year's worth over there, and you might have a different nomenclature to it over there. It's all there, but it's difficult to pull together. And through importing data into Connected Insights, it really does a bit of better holistic job of being able to pull that data together so you can get a good picture and have a great dialogue with it. We use easy to understand visuals. There is a theme of simplicity. So whilst we do have quite a few charts, they are all the sorts of charts that are simple to communicate with. It's easy to use, it's easy to customize, it's a swipe, it's a tap, it's easy to use. We do enable out the box groupings for benchmarking. You may already be familiar with similar CCG, but this is a grouping published by NHS England that is, I think it contains, the formula to generate the groupings is based around 11 metrics, things like urban status, age group, ethnicity, deprivation score, things like that. And these groupings are published, and then we can use those in the tool to enable appropriate comparisons. So you can pick your CCG and see what it's like versus suitably comparable peers. We can export for different platforms. We've mentioned these already: web, iPad, and the Viva CLM ecosystem. And this can avoid problems and costs maintaining separated projects. And the focus on data rather than, say, a value message-based tool. Typically, they are quicker to build. We don't have to sit around for multiple meetings and just decide and work out and decide what data source that a particular message may come from. They can be quicker to build. Typically, because it doesn't have that style of content in there, it can be quicker and easier for approvals. And it could offer more flexibility for the team to discuss, rather than those messages necessarily being there, all defined up front. So at this point, I just wanted to show you a demo build. I'm just going to pop out of PowerPoint and drag a YouTube window over where you can see a build going on. And hopefully this is going to play out okay, and I'll just talk over it. So here you can see a template is being chosen, much the same as PowerPoint. We've just selected a couple of slides there. Here we're going to drag a map, line chart, another line chart, I think, onto the stage. This is where we import data into the tool. And it's worth pointing out, it's not a data repository. We don't have data in there to start off with. It is a repository that you import data into for your needs. So there we go, a couple of files. And this is where we can start attaching data to the visuals, to the charts that we've laid down on the stage. This is not far off real time as well. So once we've agreed what needs to go where, it can be a very quick process to then do a build. So you can see here, we're length of stay, I think, is going on that chart. We're going to change the theme. And then there's the sorts of controls you can imagine, like text. And we can hook variables up to areas in the text. So it's possible to leverage that, which makes a really nice, rich sort of feel to it. You can see titles are being customized. I think in that demo I was copy pasting things. Can't type that quickly. So here we go. This is a second page, I think, that's going to be built here. And some donut charts are going to get laid down. I think we're going to drag across these QoF indicators. You can see that it's been sped up now a little bit. So we're trying to get the layout sorted out. So another parameter gets dragged onto the chart. You can see it building. And of course, the things like, you know, formatting and precision of the data points that you would imagine is all built in. So underneath these, line charts going to get created. And I think we're going to drag those same metrics down. So the view at the top, the donuts, that's displaying Airedale's data. And you can see the same again there. But on the little panel on the right, we can display a grouping if we want to. So here we're going to use that similar CCG. And for the devolved nations, you can see there, I should go back and just pause. So if I can get it again easily, let me just pause on that. So in England, what happens is we're going to display a particular grouping, similar CCGs, fine. But what happens when we're in Wales? Something else, some other grouping is going to be applied. So in this drop-down population select list at the top here, we're in an England CCG. But if we switch that to, say, a GP cluster in Wales, we can choose what grouping should be displayed on that chart. So similar health boards in that particular case can get displayed. Okay, we're to the end. Don't worry, I won't keep you hanging on for too long. We can enable navigation. You can see sections can get created. So at the top, there's a massive, great big tab. We're just naming one of those overview, and we'll create another section called QoF. And those two have been created now, and you can tab between them. Referencing is handled. There's a method of centrally holding a repository of references, and then those can be applied wherever they're needed. So here we go, that's one getting hooked up, and you can see the little one superscript appears. One more gets applied here. It's easy to edit and update and apply them wherever you need them. So there we go. So once that has been completed, and this is a very quick example of it, we have, let me just pause there. We have methodologies to export these for various formats. And the one that we're demoing here is using the Viva format. And it's just an illustration. I wanted to demonstrate that particular tool on the iPad. You can see that you can tab around. You can actually navigate the data using some of the visuals. So this one, I'm picking on different areas on the map, and it does effectively the same job as jumping around. Oh, in that particular example, you can see I've picked Scotland. It looks like I'm going to go for Wales. So you can see that well, those regions are in there. It's easy to jump around. Perfect. So I'm just going to pause that example there and return to my slides. Let me just maximize that again. So having shown you that, and having shown me building a dashboard there, it brings us naturally to, well, who does build then? So of course we can, as you can see there. We're familiar with data sources, where to get these sorts of data. We have tried and tested approach, of course, we understand the data structures, and we're aware of common pitfalls. But of course you can as well. There is an option to subscribe, and you'd be able to build your own ones, your new ones. You can maintain ones that you have done, and you would be able to manage updates. And of course we can support however needed for a sort of hybrid model as and when that's required. We mentioned the summary report leave piece earlier, just very lightly touched on it, but I did want to just focus on that briefly. So PDFs of the dashboard, including any customizations during the call, are carried into a PDF leave piece that can be emailed to the end customer. And that is a great way for a customer to refer to the data after the call, perhaps sharing it with colleagues. And of course, it could be sent ahead of a call as a primer. But just to let you know, that functionality is there. So how is this received? What's the anecdotal feedback, if you like, from the field? And what can I share with you around that? So I've just broken this down into sort of buckets of types of feedback that I've received. And I think actionable insights is probably number one. So drilling down from, and I've used CCG as an example, but of course it depends, you know, what the population is, what country and so on, what structures we're using. But just as an example, drilling down from parent to child, if you like, enables identification of outliers. Who makes up those numbers? That's really helpful. So it's all very well looking at, again, we'll just pick on the CCG example. It's all very well looking at CCGs, but say we do have an outlier. Well, what's causing that? Which practices are rolling up to create those numbers? And being able to drill down and see, that's what's really helpful. So easier discussion, sharing data in an easy to digest way allows for easy discussion of how or why to change. So these aren't wildly creative infographics. They are charts and line charts and maps and donuts and things that are easy to review and easy to look at. And we've had good feedback about the simplicity of this approach. And of course, benchmarking with peers is, again, something that has been fantastic. Comparisons made with appropriate peers is excellent. For example, similar CCGs in England. And this last one, I think, is actually a quote, you know, we've been invited into previously hard to reach accounts. They're interested in the data. They want to learn more. So it's been great feedback. So I just wanted to come to the end of my presentation with a few answers, if you like, to common questions. And one of them is data. Typically, I get asked, do these things run offline, and how much data can they contain? So the answer to the question will come to, but let me just work through an example with you. So top left here, let's again focus on UK here. So CCGs in England, GP clusters in Wales, health boards in Scotland, you can HCPs in Northern Ireland. You can see the structures, albeit at a macro level, adding up. These, of course, can drill down to a fine level of detail. Many thousands of practices in England and Wales and so on. So we can see the number of structures that this could amount to, approaching 20,000, just over 17,000 in this example. And if you think about that times by the number of pages in a tool, let's say on average 20 pages, and conservatively, if we're thinking about 3 charts-ish per page, and maybe 5 data points per chart, again, we're just taking some averages here, you can end up timesing all this lot together and ending up with an enormous data set, 3.4 million data points for 20 pages worth of charts. Really? Well, yes, it can get as big as that. So does that work offline, and how does it run? Well, actually, it runs fine. It runs well on an iPad, and it can indeed run and does run offline. So we've developed this platform ground up. We're an experienced bunch of people, and we've been doing this sort of thing, this type of approach for many years. We know how to structure data so that we don't have technical issues or performance issues, even on the iPad. So another question I do get asked quite a lot is, my therapy area doesn't necessarily have suitable data. What happens then? And it may be ultimately that it just doesn't, and perhaps that is a blocker. We have multiple products and services and approaches, so do speak to us if you think that is the case. But I just wanted to bring this to the table. So this was something I was looking at last week, OSA, obstructive sleep apnea. This is not an analysis we've done, I should highlight. This is just something I came across and just wanted to share. So this is published by the British Lung Foundation, and it's for data on sleep apnea. Is the risk areas to do with OSA? Is the prevalence on it? Well, no, there isn't. But this map shows predicted risk, which is based on known risk factors for OSA, things like obesity, diabetes, age, and so on. They're listed here. And whilst I don't necessarily agree with how this has been applied, it is an approach, and it does show that whilst there isn't data on OSA, there is a way around it. There's a workaround, and you can get these sorts of visuals. And there may well be another way to work around lack of data to provide enough insight to make a discussion worthwhile. So folk have spoken to me about using, another disease as a proxy, or, as in this example, finding something relevant where there might be data or whether there is data, so that a discussion can take place. So how do we roll this out across devolved nations, and how do we deal with other countries, particularly if data changes? So, just to round out the conversation, just to start it off, I suppose, Connected Insights can import any data and support any parent-child relationship. So from a technical point of view, there isn't a barrier. Of course, access to data, data availability, data latency, all of these things might be barriers, but there's no technical reason why it would not work. So specifically with devolved nations in the UK, it's usually possible to source enough data, depending on, of course, what we're looking at, enough similar data to achieve reasonable or good UK coverage. In some cases, there may still not be data, but we can display notes to that effect if the holes are very small. We can and have done freedom of information requests to elicit data to plug gaps. Of course, we need to be very sympathetic, of course, during COVID, and not spend NHS resource where we shouldn't, or where we don't need to. We can hide and show pages where there is data specific to a nation, so we can still enable more relevant dashboards and have good coverage, but all contained within one project, which is useful from a admin perspective and sign-off perspective. And what about other countries? Well, it's likely that so much changes across markets, across countries, that separate version may be necessary. It is possible to copy paste, if you like, a dashboard and use that as a as a baseline, so where to start from. Even if the data is not used, the structure, the thinking, the sections may be a useful starting point. And on the right hand side here, you can see again, I think it's a diabetes dashboard, but this was based on Norway, and the data, you can see the regions broken out there just as an illustration. We have capabilities to draw the boundaries, so we are very tech savvy and are able to enhance the tool and enhance the dashboards based on specific requirements. So we have some really good demos online. We have a Connected Insights website, and there you can go and have a look at a few examples that we've created already. I think there's an oncology one, I think there's a diabetes one, and there is a asthma and COPD prevalence. I'll call it Explorer. This is the top demo if you do go and have a look, and this was created the same week that PCN data to do with the groupings and mappings up to their parents was released. So you'll see the dots are based on longitude, latitude of postcodes of PCNs that were published, and that was an interesting analysis done early days of PCN data that was released by NHS England. So just to finish up then, before we go to questions, like I've mentioned, there's a website, and we have other collateral that you can ask for and we can send you. I do want to highlight a demo promise. Give us your therapy area and metrics of interest. We'll build a few pages, we'll build a dashboard demo for you, and we can have that discussion with yourselves. So at that point, I just wanted to hand it over, or hand back if you like, to Emily to field questions. And if anybody does have something to ask of both myself or David, please do send your questions in now.
Yeah, thanks for that, Iain and David. It's always really great to see the dashboard and understand more about its use cases. We do actually have a few questions which have been submitted. And for everybody on the line, please do continue to ask any questions you might have using the questions pane. So our first question today is in regards to remote delivery during the current environment. So the question is, with many face-to-face discussions not being able to take place during the COVID pandemic, how can tools such as this effectively be presented in the current climate?
Thanks, Emily. That's a great question. So I think that to date, we've had quite a lot of interest around this. We know that people are using various techniques, but what we'd start off with is from a technical point of view, there's no reason why content, let's say it's on iPad, can't be shared with a variety of techniques. If folk are familiar with Viva and you are using the Viva ecosystem, there is a Zoom integration. It's called Viva Engage for meetings, and we've had good feedback from some of our clients who are using that approach. We also understand that people are using Zoom outside of Viva. We also know that it works very well under Teams. So I think people are using a variety of techniques. I think that perhaps the wider question is, are people engaging face to face? And perhaps David, I could link you in on that one, and ask, in your experience, what is that engagement like across the NHS? How are folk responding? I'm of course aware of the people who we have current projects with, and are aware of their situations, and have had personally I've had some responses from folk who say there's still very good engagement, but it does depend on their particular circumstances and their dialogues. But perhaps David, if you don't mind being linked in to answer that in a more sort of general, generic sense, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Iain. I think it's obviously is a question of our time, but who knows when that position is going to change. I think there's some real advantages to remote use. I'm a non-exec director of a PCN. if we have a board meeting in a conventional style, which like we used to with 20 odd people in a room, it would have been really difficult to imagine someone being invited as a key account manager to present to us in that kind of setting. But we've now moved to remote board meetings. They work very well. And I can imagine somebody cutting us in now and having a presentation and having a section of a key account manager. So I think some of what are seen to be limitations of remote monitoring can be turned as into an asset and an opportunity for people in the industry. One of the things that hopefully came through from Iain's presentation, I was watching it more as back in the previous role of being a key account manager myself and managing a team, and that's the things I think really shine through from Iain's system is the flexibility of allowing the builds and the ease of training. And so I think, you know, when the advantages of using this system in a remote setting is firstly it's flexibility, but how easy it is to train the end user as a key account manager to use it, and to use it in an attractive, simple way in a remote call. You know, I've seen previous systems like this and they're too sophisticated, too many drop downs, very messy screens, and they become difficult then when they're used in any kind of setting, let alone a remote one. Iain, that's my reply without
that's really
prattling
helpful.
on there.
No, not at all. It's very good real life insights. Thank you for that. Emily, are there further questions?
Yeah, so we've got a couple more. So our next question is a two-parter regarding project delivery. So how long do these projects typically take? And with regards to updates, what happens when the data changes?
Okay, so a two-parter. How long do they take? So I would say out the box, a project could take, let's say around about eight weeks, start to finish, concept to completion. I think there's it depends in there. I think that it depends on where folk are with the data. Is this is this project more of a technical implementation and the data's all arranged and organized? I think if it is, it could be on the shorter side of that. I think if we're starting from scratch with, what's the story, where's the data, we've got all the devolved nations and we don't know where the data is, that perhaps could be on the longer side. But round about a couple of months, I think that, in general, I would say these are quicker, sometimes significantly quicker than a bespoke build. But appreciate, the need for bespoke builds when, very precise requirements are needed. Second part, data updates. So, of course, it kind of depends on what data there is in there, what its update cadence is, what its latency is as to how often the data does need to be updated. I think that, so it varies. We have got programs where we're updating data monthly, perhaps prescribing data, and we have other tools where we're supporting, I think, biannually and some quarterly. So there is a bit of variation there. And I just would say, if we're building dashboards for folk, then we can create a specific package or agreement, if you like, to perhaps even look out for when data changes. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and it really does depend on what data we're displaying and its cadence and latency as to how we would support with updates. Hopefully that covers that one.
Yeah, thanks, Iain. And now we have a question regarding output. So the question is, you mentioned Connected Insights can be developed standalone, Viva and web-based, but are there any other outputs supported, for example, Android? Okay,
all right, so yeah, good question. I think that, I can be very confident about the technology. We have a in-house development team, and, I don't think there's anything that they can't do. They always amaze me. So, if Android is needed to be supported, we will support it, or we'll work to support it. Our primary output methods at the moment are Viva, standalone and web, and if others are needed, then I'm confident we can deliver on those.
Great. And then we've had a really good question regarding data requests. The question is, do you have an agreement with the NHS with regards to data requests?
Yeah, okay. So at the moment we don't, although what I would say is we've created many dashboards at the moment, and we've been able to access publicly available data. Some folk have supplied us data that they may have had an agreement with, a third party to source or analyze or transpose and so on. I think it's possible that if you start asking very niche questions, very specialized questions, perhaps through some sort of DARS arrangement, you may end up with numbers that are so small that you'd get number suppression, and then you'd get big holes in your data. So you need to be reasonably careful how specific you go with these dashboards in order to get the best results. And like I say, we have produced many dashboards using good, trusted, publicly available data sources to enable these sorts of conversations.
Great. And then this is our final question here today, unless anybody wants to type one in quickly before we close. And our final question is, are calculations supported within the platform? For example, if I wanted to incorporate a model into the tool, or would this be run side by side?
Okay, that's a great question. Basically, we can support calculations, but not inside Connected Insights. So we have like I've mentioned already, we have a great development team at MTech producing calculator style tools regularly, and we do create the Connected Insights style dashboards that sit alongside those types of tools, like those calculator style tools. So they can link to each other, again, depending on the output environment. But that can be a really great way of linking the tools together. So you could have a Insights Health Economy dashboard, building up to that point, exploring unmet need, building up to a point where there's an agreement. Okay, we need to change. Let's now look at the effect of a change with a BIM, and those tools could link together. So whilst Connected Insights doesn't support calculations, if you like, it works or can work alongside a calculator style tool like a BIM and seamlessly link from one to the other. Hope that answers that question.
Great, thank you. So that's the final question that we have for today. So I suppose I want to thank everybody for attending, staying with us throughout the whole presentation. Iain and David, if you have any final remarks or comments to make, that'd be great. And if not, we'll close down the webinar.
Thanks, Emily. Just from me, just as a final reminder, demo promise, challenge us, challenge me. Tell us your therapy area, your product and your metrics of interest. We'll build a demo specifically for you and take the conversation on. That's all I'd like to say. How about yourself, David?
Nothing for me other than to echo what you just said. Come back, challenge us, and stimulate us. We always enjoy the contact from our colleagues out there.
All right, thank you, and thank you very much for joining today. Thank you, Emily, for hosting. Thank you, David, for your contributions.
Thanks, Fee.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.